Hello, everyone, and welcome to the YB Davidson Reading Room. Thank you for joining us. The YB Davidson Reading Room features excerpts from books written by unpublished authors. So, if there is anyone out there listening and you've written a book and wish your book to be featured, please let me know through the comments section. There are many talented writers out there that, for one reason or another, publishers ignore. So, here at YB Davidson Reading Room, we would like to feature those talented writers and let you decide. Let's get comfy, and I hope you enjoy listening as we will begin with the first novel in a series of novels that are a combination of mystery, intrigue, a little comedy, and of course a bit of romance. The title of each novel in the series is an anagram, with clues written in the content of each book as to what the title actually is. After listening, please provide your feedback in regards to if you enjoyed the excerpt from the novel and what does the title of the book translate to. Without further ado, we will begin with the first novel in the series titled Beware My Rounds. And the chapter we're going to read is The Body in the Woods. When they arrived at the manor house after spending the evening at Lord Astor's charity garden party, they all settled into chairs on the back terrace. Thomas lit the open fire and served the drinks. It was a beautiful night sky with stars brightly twinkling in the distance. Declan asked, did everyone have a good time this evening? To which everyone said yes. Darby took a sip of his drink, said thank goodness, a proper drink, took one sip of that plonk they were serving tonight, and poured it into the nearest plant. Everyone laughed. When Declan asked, did you hear that? Darby said it sounded like gunshots. They were all silent now, as Declan instinctively put his arm around Evie, pulling her closer to him. As they sat in silence for a few minutes, trying to hear if what they heard was gunshots, Declan thought to himself, people would shoot clay pigeons, but that was during the day. They never had any problems with lampers, as the village people valued too much the employment opportunities all the estates provided for the village people. Declan was puzzled. Then all of a sudden there were three more shots. Declan said, that sounds like a handgun. Darby said, that isn't a shotgun, and started to get worried, as who would be roaming around in the dark shooting off a handgun? Those things didn't happen here ever. Then Declan's cell phone rang. It was Willie, their stable manager. Willie asked Declan, did you hear what sounded like gunshots? Declan replied, yes. We are all sitting on the back terrace and we heard what sounded like 6 gunshots from a handgun. Willie said, that's what I thought I heard, so I have the stable hands checking all the horses. If we see anything, I will ring back. Declan thanked Willie, said, be careful. Declan said, let's put the fire out. I think we should all go inside. Declan said, Darby, you better stay here tonight. I don't want you driving back and staying at Rose End alone, as we have no idea where or why those shots were fired. Darby agreed to stay only because if something was wrong, he could help. Declan said, listen, everyone, why don't we all go to bed? Then in the morning we can deal with this. It's most likely nothing. Corey asked, are you sure? Because we heard gunshots. Declan said, yes, there's plenty of security measures around the estate, so there was no need to worry. Corey said, just ring us if you need us, as they went out the door. Then everyone went to their rooms. Declan said to Darby, I'll get you some PJs and clothes for the morning, then showed Darby the room next to Cindy to stay in, telling Darby that Cindy would most likely sleep better knowing he was just next door. Darby said, I wish I had brought my special walking stick, to which they both laughed. Darby said to Declan, you are worried, aren't you? Declan said, yes, you and I both know this never happens, but we need to stay calm for the ladies and the boys, so we will deal with this in the morning. Try to get some sleep, and thank you for staying. Darby said, my pleasure, and good night. The next morning, as Declan, Evie, and Darby were sitting on the terrace, sipping their coffee in comfortable silence, when Declan said to Darby, let's go to my study so I can ring Giles. Maybe he will send a team to search the property, yours and ours, just to be sure. Darby said, that's a good idea. When they arrived in the study, they sat in the soft leather chairs by the fireplace as Declan rang Giles. whom he had known for years. Giles, who had worked for the Home Office when Declan had first met him, had been reassigned to the Foreign Office many years ago. As Giles had risen through the ranks at the Foreign Office, was now head of a secret covert operations branch that was run out of the Foreign Office. This covert operations branch dealt with the most secretive and sensitive operations around the world. Giles said, "So Giles here." Declan asked, "How are you?" Giles said, "Doing great. How can I help?" Declan explained what had happened last night. Giles responded, "This doesn't sound good. Would it be all right with you if I brought a team out to complete a sweep of the properties?" Declan said that would be great. However, he would like if they could complete the task discreetly with plainclothes chaps, as he didn't wish to alert or alarm the people in the area. Giles agreed. He would think up a cover story in case anyone asked why so many people have suddenly invaded the village. Giles asked, "May we arrive today, or would you prefer we arrive tomorrow?" Declan said, "You may arrive today, if you like, but you better work out what accommodation you will need and contact the hotels in the village." Giles agreed, said he would ring back with the time of arrival. Declan said, "Thank you, have a safe trip," and rang off. Darby asked Declan, "Is Giles coming?" Declan said, "Yes, he wants to arrive today." Darby said, "You will have to keep your guard up, as he will have his chaps trying to poke into all sorts." Declan said, "I know. I will restrict where his chaps are allowed to go. Now, is it okay if they do a sweep of your property?" Darby said, "Certainly. I have nothing that Giles would be interested in, as I won't let them into the house, because who knows? They are liable to place cameras and microphones, who knows where." Declan said, "Good point." Declan asked Darby if he was still using the closed-circuit system that Atticus had installed. Darby said, "Absolutely. Best thing I ever did was allow Atticus to install that system. It records everything as well as it monitors all the fields and woods." Declan said, "You can't tell Giles about that system, all right? As there is no need for Giles to know." Darby agreed. During the drive to the Bentley estate, Fletcher began to ask Giles questions. Fletcher asked, "Do you think this is a serious situation or just an overreacting Duke?" Fletcher, having never met Declan, had a vision in his mind of an older, overstuffed man as the Duke. Giles, having known Declan for years, now laughed, said the Duke never overreacts. Fletcher asked, "Isn't it normal to hear gunshots in the country? Don't these people shoot things all the time?" Not being familiar with how the elite of society operated, and had minimal experience mingling amongst them, only doing so during covert operations. Giles said the gunshots were heard well after midnight. The Duke said they sound like a handgun, most definitely not a long rifle or a shotgun. Fletcher said, "Is the Duke sure? I wouldn't think a person like him would know the difference. Maybe he had a bit too much to drink while watching the telly." Giles laughed at the picture in his mind of Declan sitting watching the telly, sipping on a glass of his rare scotch. Fletcher asked, "What's so funny?" Giles said, "The Duke is an expert marksman. There's no doubt in my mind he knows the difference between the sound of a shotgun and the sound of a handgun. Besides, he isn't the only one that heard them. Lord Montrose was with him as well, as his stable manager heard them." Giles told no one that from time to time Declan, like his father before him, through the Bentley Foundation, would assist the Foreign Office security services whenever they got themselves into a pickle in foreign countries. As that, no one needed to know. Fletcher said, "I understand why this Duke is important, as he sits in the House of Lords, and especially I read the reports in regards to what happened to his father. But this is a lot of expertise to send for a single report of hearing gunshots in the night." Giles said, "It is not your place to judge what is or isn't the appropriate manpower to use in this investigation. The last thing Giles needed was this guy digging into things best left buried." Giles thought to himself, this one was a nosy Parker. He would have to keep his eye on him and restrict the flow of information, and replace this nosy Parker when they returned to London with someone more trustworthy. Sitting in the study, Declan said to Darby, "Why don't you, Evie, and I go for a ride round the grounds, see if we can find anything while we wait for Giles?" Darby said, "Have you gone mad? I'm not getting on a horse. I haven't been on a horse in ages." Declan laughed, said, "Don't be such a baby." Darby said, "I dare say I would most likely fall off and hurt myself." Declan said, "You can ride Mr. Muddles. It's the horse Evie uses when children come to ride. He's not a large horse, so if you fell off, you wouldn't have far to fall." Darby said, "I'm so happy to find this all very amusing. I don't have any riding clothes." Declan said, "You're already wearing my clothes, so you can wear a set of mine. With that settled, let's go get Evie." The three changed, went down the stables. Evie was happy they were going for a ride. She loved riding, but was a bit worried at what they might find when they were out there. Darby, seeing Mr. Muddles, the horse he would be riding, thought, "Great, I get the kitty horse, not quite the image I wish to portray, but on the bright side, at least I won't have to worry this horse is going to jump the gate when I least expect it." Darby looked at Declan's horse, which was a beautiful chestnut-colored stallion named Mr. Wiggles, which was the horse Evie used to ride, which Declan could never figure out how Evie, at only 5'2" tall, ever managed to mount such a large horse. But there had been an incident, so now Declan rode the horse, forbade Evie from riding it, and purchased a beautiful mahogany bay-colored stallion named Knightsbridge for Evie to ride, which was the perfect size for her. Despite Darby's protests, they were all expert riders, as they had all learned to ride at a very young age. The trio set off as Declan's horse jumped the gate. To Darby's horror, Mr. Muddles was set to do the same, but was saved by Jack, one of the stable hands, who managed to get the gate open just before Mr. Muddles approached it. Darby let out a sigh of relief, as it really had been years since he rode a jumper, and knew if the horse jumped he would fall off and make a fool of himself. They rode across the open fields, then through the forest, and just as they approached the edge of Declan's property, where it met the edge of Darby's property, they saw something rather large laying on the ground. They all dismounted and tied their horses to trees and walked over to what was laying on the ground to get a closer look. Evie gasped. Then Declan turned her away, hugged her to make her feel safe. Darby stood there looking down at the body in the woods, puzzled as to why is this chap laying on his property. Darby nudged the body with his toe, and thought, the nerve of this chap to invade his privacy, to get caught up on his kip on his land. Declan turned around from Evie, seeing Darby nudging the body with the toe of his riding boot, said, "Stop that, you idiot, the chap's dead." Darby, stunned by this revelation, stopped nudging the body and stepped back. Then Darby, not wanting this to be his problem, said to Declan, "The chap is more on your property than mine, so should we pull him over a bit so he isn't straddling the property line? After all, better your problem than mine. You are better equipped to handle such things." Declan, shaking his head, not realizing that Evie had walked over the body to get a closer look. When Evie said, "He's been shot, and by the amount of blood, it appears he's been shot more than once." Declan took her hand, said, "Get away from him. You shouldn't see this." Darby, who was still horrified at this chap landing on his property, walked over to the body, said to Declan, "You grab his foot, I'll grab the other, and we'll just slide him over a bit, so he's only on your property." Declan said, "Get away from him. Don't touch him." Then asked Darby if he had some rope at his house. Darby said, "How would I know? I don't hang about in the gardener's shed, now do I?" Then said, "Do you have rope at your house?" To which Declan replied, "We are closer to your house. What about the troll? Would he have any rope?" Darby said, "It's all I can do to get the troll to mend the fences, which are not rope. So no, I have no idea if the troll has any rope." As they were busy arguing about the rope, neither realized that Evie had mounted her horse, and as she rode by them, said she was going to Darby's house to get some rope. She would be right back, and before either of them could stop her, she was gone. While waiting for Evie, Declan said to Darby, "I wonder who this chap is. Why is he here? Who left him, and where did he come from?" Darby said, "He's most likely some lamper that got into a fight with his mates. They shot him and ran off." Declan said to Darby, "You know as well as I do this chap is not a lamper. Look at his Calvin Klein suit. He's wearing Gucci shoes. Do you know any lampers that would be dressed like that, stomping around the woods in the middle of the night? I think that's just wishful thinking on your part. Darby said, I know. I just wish this chap had have fallen over onto your property and not in the middle of both. Declan said, how inconvenient of him to do that. Darby said, smart ass. Then Declan said, pick his hand up. Darby said, what? Have you lost your mind? I'm not touching him. Declan said, stop being a twit and pick it up. Finally, Darby picked it up. Declan said, hold it still so I can scan his fingerprints with my phone. Darby said, you can do that? Declan said, yes. Atticus installed an app on my phone. Move his thumb so I can scan it properly. Darby said, this is disgusting. Hurry up, will you? At the rate you're moving, we'll be here until the end of time. Declan said, I'm finished, as Darby unceremoniously dropped the poor chap's hand. Then Declan said, here, grab his shoulder and hold him still so I can get a picture of his face. Darby said, are you playing silly buggers with me? Why on earth would you want a picture of his face? Half of it's covered in blood. Declan said, just do it before Evie gets back. Darby said, this is just gross, as Declan took the picture. As Darby once again just dropped the poor chap so he landed with a thud, as Declan was about to scold him for his disrespectful treatment of the poor chap, as Evie returned with the rope. So Declan and Evie attached the rope to the trees in a square about 5 meters from the body in an attempt to cordon off the area. None of their cell phones could get a signal, so Declan said, best we ride back to the house, and off they went. When Giles and Fletcher arrived at the gates to Bentley Manor, Fletcher asked Giles, have you ever been here? Giles said, no, I don't mix in the same social circles as the Duke. Laughing, then said, but the Duke calls it their cottage in the country. Fletcher looking at the giant ornate wrought iron gates, Fletcher thought, who would have these elaborate gates for cottage in the country? As they were driving up the drive, Fletcher thought, beautiful gardens. Then as the house came into sight, Fletcher gasped. You call this a cottage? This isn't even a house. It's a bloody palace. Look at this place. Giles said, it really is something, isn't it? Giles, who had always been curious as to what the Bentley Manor looked like, was stunned by the beauty of the place, looking like a shimmering gold jewel surrounded by the most immaculate gardens in a rainbow of colors. Giles, uncertain where to park, looked ahead and saw a line of Land Rovers neatly parked in what looked like a parking lot of some sort. So he decided to park over there, as he didn't think his government-issue sedan would look good parked at the front door of this magnificent home. When the pair arrived at the front door, before they could ring the door, opened by a fit-looking man of about 50 years of age in an impeccable suit, and he asked, can I help? To which Giles said, I have an appointment to see the Duke of Northumberland. The man replied, I see. Please do come in, and led them into an enormous entrance hall filled with rich wood paneling, luxurious wallpaper, and paintings. Sparkling chandeliers, as the sight of all this took their breath away. The man led them past the massive, intricately carved wood staircase into a very large room that was covered in soft blue damask wallpaper, rich, luxurious furnishings, massive fireplace. As they sat on one of the sofas, as Fletcher was standing there looking around the room thinking what a spectacular room this was, when the man asked if they would like some refreshments while they waited. Giles said, no thank you, then asked if he knew how long his grace would be. The man, whom Giles assumed was the butler, replied, his grace has gone out for a ride earlier and should return soon. Please have a seat, then left and closed the door. Fletcher looked at Giles, who headed towards the sofa facing the door, and the two sat. Fletcher was surprised how comfy the sofa was. Fletcher said to Giles, the place was spectacular, but somehow it felt very warm and comfy. Giles said, it feels like a happy place, doesn't it? Fletcher agreed. Evie, Declan, and Darby returned to the house. Declan and Darby left Evie to sit in the terrace to have her smoke, while they walked inside to Henry, who said there was 2 gentlemen waiting for him in the blue room. Declan thanked Henry, asked if someone could bring coffee. Jerry said, "Right away, sir," and left, while Declan and Darby entered the blue room. When they entered, Giles and Fletcher rose from the sofa. Fletcher, thinking to himself, this must be the sun, when Giles walked towards Declan with an outstretched hand, to which Declan shook his hand. Then Giles said, "Good to see you again, your grace," to which Declan said, "You as well," then said, "You remember Lord Montrose," as he shook Lord Montrose's hand. Giles said, "Yes, I do, and this is my colleague Fletcher," to which Declan shook his hand, and Darby walked and sat in one of the wing chairs. When Declan sat in the other wing chair, Declan said, "Don't mind him, he's had a terrible shock this morning," and started to laugh. Fletcher, thinking to himself, "Wow, this is the Duke? He's nothing like the vision of him I had in my mind. This guy was very tall, and in his riding clothes was very buff, displaying muscles that Fletcher wished he had, exuding electricity from him that was more than your average charisma. This guy was a long way from the overstuffed short guy I thought he would be." Fletcher thought to himself that the Duke's friend was a prissy prat. He didn't have the manners to shake my hand. Giles asked Declan, "Did you have a good ride?" Declan said, "Yes, very good indeed." As he was responding, the door opened, and Fletcher couldn't believe what he saw. She was the most beautiful woman he had ever seen. She was petite and looked adorable in her riding outfit. Her long, honey blonde hair was in a ponytail. Her beauty wasn't just physical. She had a magnetism that drew you to her. Fletcher hoped his mouth wasn't hanging open. Evie said, "Oh, I'm sorry. I didn't know you had company," as Giles and Fletcher stood up. Giles went over to Evie, shook her hand as she gave him a kiss on the cheek, said, "How nice to see you." Then she walked over to the Duke's chair, said, "Is there any coffee?" to which he smiled at her, and you could see the sparkle of love in his eyes as he said to her, "I'll be right there to make you one." Evie said thank you and left the room, with the Duke following her close behind. Fletcher thought to himself, and what man wouldn't? While the Duke was out of the room, Giles asked Lord Montrose how he had been. Darby said, "I've been fine, but they are holding me prisoner in this place, subjecting me to all sorts of torture that you just can't imagine." Giles smiled, said, "How terrible for you." The butler arrived with the coffee, and Lord Montrose said, "Shall I be mother?" then proceeded to pour the coffee. Then he and Giles were chatting away while Fletcher couldn't get that woman out of his mind, as it seemed the other two were just talking gibberish. It had been at least 30 minutes before the Duke returned, apologizing for taking so long. His wife had difficulties operating the espresso machine, to which Lord Montrose burst out laughing. As Fletcher noticed, the Duke was trying to fix his hair with his fingers. Declan said to Giles, "You have a problem." Giles asked, "What would that be?" Declan said, "I'm going to have to ring the local police, as when we went for a ride this morning, we found a dead chap on Lord Montrose's property." Darby chimed in and said, "That chap is not on my property, he's half on yours." Giles sat for a minute, dumbfounded by this revelation, then asked, "You found a body in the woods?" Declan said, "Yes, this morning." Giles said, "That's not good." Darby chimed in, "I dare say it isn't. What I want to know is, when are you going to move them? I don't want dead people littering my property." Giles said, "I bet you don't." Declan said, "Never mind him. What do you need, Giles? As I will have to ring the village police, as you well know." Giles asked, "Can you show me the body first? Then we can discuss what to do next." Declan said, "Yes." Then asked, "Do you ride?" Giles said, "A horse?" Declan laughed, said, "Yes, a horse. What do you think we have here, donkeys?" To that Fletcher almost started to laugh, but said, "I ride, sir, if that helps." Declan looked at Giles and said, "What about you?" Giles hesitated to answer. Then Declan said, "I guess not." Then he said to Darby, "You can drive him over in one of the gardener's vehicles." Darby said, "Certainly, I can do that." Declan said, "Great, that's settled," took his cell phone out of his pocket, and Fletcher thought he saw some pink lacy items sticking out of his pocket. Then the Duke asked someone on the phone to have the horses ready. They would be down in a minute. Then he rose from his chair and went out the door, then came back to Darby, the gardener's vehicles ready. When the four of them went out front, Fletcher expected to see a tractor-type vehicle, but he saw a renegade Jeep instead. Then they left, Darby and Giles to their own devices as Fletcher and Declan went to the stables. Willie came along and looked Fletcher up and down, said, "We saddled Mr. Muddles for you." Then he asked, "Can you handle a horse?" Fletcher said, "Yes, sir." Willie, pointing, "Go over there and Jack will assist you." Fletcher walked out of the stables to where the man had pointed and saw they had put steps next to a beautiful horse. The young man said to Fletcher, "We thought this might help." Fletcher thanked him, then mounted the horse, thinking to himself, what a helpful group of people. They didn't make a fuss about how he needed help to mount the horse. From the Duke down, they were all very gracious, which was unexpected as he was a stranger to them. Declan appeared, expertly mounted his horse, and they rode off. While Declan jumped the gates, Jack opened the gates for Fletcher. It was not long before he realized they were at the body in the woods. Darby, having regaled Giles with nonsense stories all the way to the body, as Giles thought to himself, having survived the ride with Lord Montrose, he was actually happy to see a dead body if it meant he could stop listening to Lord Montrose. They stood looking at the body. Giles said, "You were right, Lord Montrose. He sure doesn't appear to be a village tramp. I don't think many tramps wear designer shoes or suits." Giles said to Fletcher, "Help me search his pockets." So with latex gloves on, they began to search his pockets. Giles said to Declan, "There is nothing in his pockets. No ID, no receipts, no money, nothing." Giles said to Declan and Darby, "Do you recognize this chap at all?" Both said no. Then Giles said to Declan, "You said your wife was with you. Would she recognize him?" Declan gave him a look to kill. Then Declan said, "My wife?" To which Darby burst out laughing. Declan said, "What could my wife possibly have to do with this?" Giles, realizing he had asked the wrong question and the Duke was getting very upset, said to Declan, "I mean, she was with you when you found the body, that's all." Declan started to pace around to try to cool off before he said something he ordinarily wouldn't have said. Declan said to Giles, "Please leave my wife out of this." Giles said to Declan, "I didn't mean to infer anything in regards to your wife. I just thought maybe she had seen him in the village in passing, that's all." Declan said, "Do you really think my wife walks around the village looking at guys in cheap off-the-rack suits?" Then he said, "Giles, you just keep digging yourself in deeper, so why don't you quit now and tell us what you're going to do about this chap? Because I am going to ring the village police shortly, and believe me, they will have this chap out of here in no time, so you best get on." Thankfully, the Duke's phone rang. Declan, listening as he paced around, then said, I appreciate that. Love you more." Declan said to Giles, "Well, what are you doing besides blaming my wife for this chap being here?" Giles asked, "Are these all hoofs and footprints yours?" Declan said, "Do they look like they're all mine? You can look at Darby's feet. Actually, they are my boots on Darby's feet, and he was nudging this poor chap as Darby, the stun bunny, thought he was laying there asleep." Giles looked at Darby, then asked, "Did you really?" Darby said, "Well, how was I to know that that was blood? Do you think I find bloody bodies every day? That's your chap's job." Giles just shook his head. Fletcher, thinking to himself, we are never going to get anywhere with this pair, when Declan said, "Is this what you chaps do, stand around the body and hope for the best?" Fletcher said, "Well, he isn't dressed for a walk in the woods. As to me, I wouldn't walk in the woods dressed like that. But I'm at a bit of a disadvantage, as I don't know if you folks dress like that to walk in the woods." Declan said to Giles, "See, you have nothing to worry about. Fletcher here is using his common sense." Declan said, "You're on the right track. But look first at his clothing. It has designer label, but it isn't top end. It's off the rack. The Gucci shoes are well worn, so that tells you that this chap doesn't dress like this for a walk in the woods. He's the type to wear jeans or sweats." Giles, who was looking at the ground, said, "Wow, these are tiny boot prints. Do you think there were kids around here?" Declan said, "Those are my wife's boot prints. It might be useful to follow the two parallel footprint tracks and when you arrive where they end, you may find a vehicle or tire tracks there. Declan's phone rang. He said, "We are out in the woods by Uncle Rosie's house. Do you want to meet us at Uncle Rosie's? Stay on the pavement. They will need to check for tire tracks." "Okay, love you, bye." Declan said to Darby, "Tristan is going to meet us at your house so you can pick up some clothes." Darby said, "All right." Declan said to Giles, "I don't have all day to stand here with you, so either we leave you here or you go with Lord Montrose and Fletcher and I will follow tracks back. How's that?" Giles said, "That's fine with me." Declan and Fletcher followed the tracks on foot with the horses following behind. Fletcher asked, "What do you think is going on here?" Declan said, "I have no idea. We don't get strangers around here, and how that chap ended up there is anyone's guess." Fletcher said, "You have a beautiful place here." Declan said, "Thank you. It's been in the family for centuries. A lot of very happy times have happened here." They reached almost to Darby's driveway when the tracks went towards the fence. Declan said to Fletcher, "Now what does that tell you?" Fletcher said, I better look along the road on the other side of the fence. Do you know why someone would be watching Lord Montrose's home?" Declan laughed, said no, but whoever they are couldn't have picked a more boring target to watch, as all he does is sit in his snug sipping port. Fletcher, when he saw Darby's house, thought to himself, "Wow, look at this place. Not as big as the Duke's, but what a beautiful home." Fletcher was surprised that although these people had everything, they really were very down to earth, not arrogant at all. Then looked over to see where the Duke had walked, to see a Land Rover with what looked like could be some of his sons, as they were the mirror image of the Duke, just younger versions. Then Lord Montrose and Giles showed up. As Lord Montrose went into the house, Giles walked over to Fletcher, asked, "Found anything?" Fletcher said, "The tracks lead to the fence, so we should have the team go up and down the road in search of a vehicle or tire tracks." Giles agreed. Fletcher asked, "Do you know why someone would be watching Lord Montrose's house? He just seems to me to be a lazy peer that talks a lot of gibberish." Giles started to laugh. Fletcher gave him a puzzled look, to which Giles said, "Don't let that gibberish talking lord fool you, or you will be sorry you did," and walked away. Fletcher, thinking to himself, "Does anyone around here talk straight besides the Duke?" Then Lord Montrose exited his house carrying a rather large suitcase, which they put in the boot of the Land Rover. Then Fletcher walked over to the group. Declan said to Fletcher, "Tristan will ride back with you, and Giles, Atticus will drive you back to." When they arrived back at Bentley Manor, they were standing about out front of the house, Declan, Giles, Darby, Fletcher, when Declan said to them, "I already rang the village police. They will be here shortly." Giles was a bit disappointed, but understood. Then the front door opened. Fletcher looked over and thought to himself, there she was, that beautiful woman, standing there in a pale yellow dress with matching shoes, looking so radiant, as she said to the Duke that Lexi was on the phone for him and had been trying to get a hold of him for more than an hour. Declan said, "Please let him know I'll ring him back shortly." Evie went back into the house. Declan said, "The chap in the woods is the village police problem now, so there was no need for Giles' team to search the properties." Thanked him and said, "Have a safe trip back to London," then went into the house. Giles and Fletcher got into their vehicle, drove out the gates. Fletcher asked Giles, "Are we going back to London?" Giles said, "Not tonight. I need to do some thinking. Something isn't right." As they settled into the chairs in the bar of the hotel, Fletcher said to Giles, "I get the feeling that the Duke and his gibberish-talking friend Lord Montrose are not telling us everything about the dead chap in the woods." Giles laughed, said, "That is an understatement." Fletcher asked Giles, "Do you think they know who the dead chap is?" Giles said, "No, I don't. The way the chap was dressed, he certainly didn't travel in their social circle, so they wouldn't have known who he was. They also didn't touch the body other than Lord Montrose, and he only nudged it with his boot, so they didn't go through his pockets and remove anything." Fletcher asked, "Do you think they know why that chap was in the woods?" Giles said, I don't know, but I think the Duke will certainly find out, and most likely not share his findings with us. Fletcher asked why not. Giles said, would you trust the Foreign Office? Fletcher laughed, said, quite right, I wouldn't. Giles said to Fletcher, I had hoped to get a peek into the Duke's security setup while we were here at Bentley Manor. I thought the hearing the gunshots in the woods was a good excuse to convince the Duke to show us what security he has. Fletcher asked, why would you want to know that? Giles said, knowledge is power, and the Duke has lots of knowledge. Fletcher said, so you wanted to see what security measures the Duke has so you could breach it when it suited you. Giles said, I had hoped to. However, the Duke is a slippery one that I have been trying to get ahead of for years and can never quite manage it. Fletcher thinking to himself and was very puzzled by all this, as what could the Duke possibly know that would interest Giles? I hope you enjoyed the excerpt from the book Beware My Realms. If you are interested in reading about what happened before the characters got to the body in the woods and what happens afterwards, please let me know in the comments section. I look forward to reading all your comments. Please leave your feedback in the comments section and don't forget to hit the like and subscribe buttons. It's free. Hope you will join me for the next episode where we will read an excerpt from the book titled Great Evie Said for your info. Until then, always remember, every day is a gift.